Well, it's not an espresso, but an iced coffee sure hits the spot. But greetings and salutations, guys. Welcome back to another video. I know it's been a couple of weeks since I last posted, but I recently just got back from a 3-month trip throughout Europe with my best friend, and I've got to say it was probably one of the most incredible and life-changing opportunities. And now that I've been back for a couple of weeks, I figured it's the perfect time for me to share a couple of lessons I've learned so that anyone out there who's looking to travel can learn from my experiences and not fall into the same mistakes we did. So let's go ahead and jump into a couple of things I learned throughout my 3-month travel. Now, number one, and this is a lesson I learned the hard way, but you gotta bring less than you think you need. And what I mean by this is while you're packing, really break down every single thing that's going into your suitcase and ensure that it has a purpose and distinct function that you're going to be using it for, so that way you're not traveling around with all this unnecessary clothes, gear, or random miscellaneous items that you never end up actually using. And throughout the entire trip, it's just going to save your back a lot of weight from not having to carry all that extra gear. You're going to be able to actually enjoy the new places you're exploring and be able to pick up a couple of local souvenirs that you can then bring home. And additionally, any random little miscellaneous things that you think you might need but aren't sure, you can probably bet on the safe side knowing that anything you actually will need, you can pick up while you're traveling. But to be honest, if it weren't for my mom coming about halfway through the trip to help take a suitcase home, it literally would have been so much harder for us to travel around and be flexible with our plans because we're going to be weighted down by all these extra luggages. Now, a second lesson we quickly learned is more about the culture, and especially while we're traveling throughout Europe, something that we weren't accustomed to is not having to tip. And that was a pretty big culture shock. Every time we were getting ready to tab out, we would kind of look at the check and feel like there was a step missing. But to be honest, it made our trip a lot more enjoyable knowing that we didn't have to calculate an extra percentage that we were going to have to tip. However, something that we weren't accustomed to here in the United States is something known as a service charge, and this is something that most restaurants will do throughout Europe, and it can vary anywhere from a couple of euros to 10 euros depending on the type of restaurant or establishment you're in. And it's basically a service fee they're going to charge for seating you at the table. And to be honest, it may not make a lot of sense for us foreigners, but we did have a pretty gnarly encounter somewhere in Italy where we basically sat down at a table, we didn't even order anything, and we decided to switch restaurants. But after the waiter had already brought us a bottle of water, which we hadn't even opened, and tried to leave, we basically got into a big argument with the owner saying that we didn't even sit there, we didn't order any food, we hadn't even opened the bottle of water, so why was he charging a 10 euro service fee when we hadn't even done anything but sit in the establishment? So that's a pretty big lesson we learned early on, and I'm sure it's going to be helpful to some of you guys traveling. Now, number 3, let's talk about euros. And given the fact that the dollar and euro is pretty much comparable, it made all of our conversions while we were doing our daily expenses a lot more manageable because you could basically consider the dollar and the euro equivalent. However, a big tip that we learned early on is that you want to convert as much euros as you can. And yes, while traveling, it may not be the smartest idea to travel around with a lot of cash. Being smart about how you're allocating your cash versus your credit card usage is actually a pretty important lesson, especially given the fact that a lot of places in Europe will still only accept cash. So you don't want to be stuck in a spot where you really want to experience this food or this activity and they only accept euros. And trust me when I say that the ATM fees are pretty ridiculous, as well as if you go into any currency conversion place, they're going to charge you about 20%. So I remember about halfway through the trip, I was converting about $100 that my mom had left me, and I really only got about 80 euros out of it. So being able to have as much cash on hand as you can while traveling is going to be an absolute lifesaver. Speaking of euros, let's talk a little bit about budgeting. Now, budgeting was honestly one of the most important things I learned throughout my trip in Europe. Given the fact that my sponsorships and brand deals were the sole source of income to fund the entire trip, we basically had to make sure we were working on enough videos to make sure that we were able to meet ends meet and continue our travels. Now, trust me when I say I know how hard budgeting can be because I'm a pretty heavy spender, but luckily I've been able to be a lot smarter with my spending habits thanks to the sponsor of today's video, Fintron. Now, Fintron isn't like your regular investing app. They actually help you invest in your future and give you rewards by being more financially literate. For example, they have a bunch of different lessons going over everything you need to know to start investing in stocks, and they can even automate your investing in over 2,000 stocks and ETFs, which is a great way to start putting aside some of your savings so that you're saving for your future and setting aside a portion of your funds. Now, a really great feature of the Fintron app is that they even have a master budget where you can input all of your monthly expenses and income, and it'll break down exactly how much you're spending on different categories like going out, shopping, and any other expenses you have within that month. It'll help calculate all of that and make sure you're staying within your budget. And you can even automate it to set aside a percentage of your monthly income so that it's going towards those smart financial investments like stocks and ETFs. And the great thing about Fintron is that the more you improve your financial literacy using their lessons on investing, you earn points for every lesson completed, and then you're able to redeem those points for gift cards to some of your favorite brands. Now, while I was traveling, like I said, it was pretty hard to make sure that we were making ends meet, so being financially smart with the budget is one of the most essential ways to ensure that you have a long, fulfilling trip. Now, if you guys are interested to learn more about Fintron, there will be a link in my description where you guys can check them out, and I promise it's going to be one of the easiest ways to make sure you're keeping track of your budget and ensure you have an enjoyable trip. Next up, let's talk about transportation and housing. Now, for our first 2 months throughout the trip, we were actually staying in an Airbnb in Paris and in Florence. For the last month we were staying, as well as any weekend trips, we were basically staying in hostels, and hostels are a really cheap and affordable way to travel around because you're basically paying for a single bed in a very college dorm-like environment. Most of them will have public bathrooms, bar downstairs, and just communal areas where travelers can get together and get to know one another and explore the city city, and it's honestly one of the best ways to meet new people from all over the world. I've met so many great people, and they can really turn into some lifelong friends. For example, we made a couple of friends while we were staying at a hostel in Lake Como, and later on in the trip, we all happened to be in Madrid at the same time, so we were able to rent an Airbnb and have a great experience with some people we had just met. But nonetheless, hostels are a really affordable way for you to spend your nights and explore these new places. So a really great resource to check out is going to be a website called hostels.com, where they basically break down every single hostel that's available in that certain location, and you can see how much it's going to cost for different size rooms. Number 7 on our list is you want to plan things ahead of time, and especially while we're traveling throughout Europe during the summer, which is peak tourism time, it was pretty difficult, if not impossible, to get tickets to a bunch of things we wanted to do. For example, we never got around to the catacombs in Paris or even going to the Louvre because the lines were going to be so long. But if you know you're going to be in a certain location ahead of time, definitely look into the tickets of the most popular attractions that you want to see, because I guarantee if you show up the day before or the day of, it's probably likely that they're going to be sold out. All right, to be honest, we're actually going to be able to skip the entire line because we bought our tickets online. Shout out Chandler for thinking ahead. Also, if there's anything we've learned during our time here in Paris, is that if you want to go to an exhibit, museum, get your tickets early. So a couple of things we missed out on seeing were the Last Supper fresco, the Michelangelo's David in Florence, and a bunch of other really cool tourist attractions that we definitely should have looked into tickets ahead of time. But I'm hoping you guys can learn from our mistakes and know to book your things ahead of time. Number 8 is double check your belongings, and this might seem like a no-brainer tip, but especially while you're traveling around, things can get pretty hectic, and if you're moving from train to bus to plane, it can be very easy to forget things behind. And a pretty crazy example of something that happened to us while we were traveling throughout Portugal was we had a photo shoot, and we were basically done taking pictures, called an Uber, and as soon as we got back to our hotel, I looked around and I said, "Where's my camera?" And for the longest time, I thought I had left it in the Uber, but just on a whim, we decided to go back to our last spot that we had it, and miraculously, some guys were sitting there holding the camera that I had just left and said they had just been chilling at the park waiting for someone to come by and pick it up. And to be honest, the moment I saw them holding my camera, my heart instantly dropped because it was such a sense of relief. So take it from me and don't learn the hard way, but always double check before you leave a place that you have your phone, wallet, keys, AirPods, any miscellaneous things that could easily fall out of your pocket. You want to double check and make sure that you always have them on you. Number 9 on our list is you want to respect the place you're in, and given the fact that we were traveling through a lot of historical and religious places such as the Vatican City, Rome, and different cities where we were purely tourists, you have to be cognizant of the fact that you're an outsider visiting someone else's city, and ensure you're not giving tourists a bad reputation by being obnoxious, being rude to waiters, and overall just being a menace to society. As you're exploring these new places and understanding these new cultures, it's good to be curious and ask questions about things you don't understand in a way that doesn't come off as ignorant or prejudiced, and truly out of curiosity. And that's really how the locals are going to open up to you and share more about their culture and answer any of those questions that you might have. This was truly relevant while we were traveling throughout Italy. There was so much about the culture that I had no idea about, and it really wasn't until I started talking to the locals and understanding more about their culture that I was really able to appreciate the time there. Next up, let's talk about languages. And given the fact that you're traveling throughout Europe where a ton of different languages are spoken, it obviously is going to be pretty beneficial to learn a new language before you go abroad. However, if that's not the case and you're traveling somewhere where it may be a pretty difficult language to learn, I definitely recommend at least picking up a couple of conversational phrases. That way you just seem a little bit more friendly when you walk into these stores. You're able to have conversational small talk in a language that they may feel more confident in. And going in with the excuse thinking that everyone is able to speak English is a pretty naive and ignorant way to start traveling. If you think about it, while yes, English is a pretty dominant language, especially in the places we were traveling, the more you get into the suburbs or outskirts of a country, they really might not know any English. And rather than trying to mime or mimic what you're trying to say, having the cultural awareness to really try and understand where they're coming from and find a common ground is going to be a really beneficial way for you to learn more about a language and have a deeper appreciation of the people and culture it's coming from. And finally on our list, if there's one thing that I learned, it's being independent. And traveling alone for 3 months or with a best friend or with a partner can be very difficult. There are times where you're going to feel so alone and you feel like you have no idea what you're doing, you don't know what your next steps are, you don't know how you're getting home, and you don't know if you're going to be able to afford that meal that night. But at the end of the day, you have to have faith in yourself and know that everything will be alright. A big phrase my buddy Chandler and I said anytime we were facing adversities was, "This too shall pass." If we missed a train, if we forgot to book a flight, if things were just shitty and weren't going our way, know that this too shall pass. And that phrase single-handedly saves us so much stress, knowing that whatever happens, we will figure it out. We will hop on the next flight, we will catch the next train, we will find our luggage, and everything will be alright. But guys, those were a couple of things I learned throughout my time in Europe. I hope that this helped, especially if you're thinking about traveling, because trust me when I say it is pretty damn hard navigating a different country that you've never been to if you don't speak the language. So take it from someone who has personally experienced this and learn from my mistakes. But guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to drop a like down below. It helps the channel out a ton. If you're new around here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because I've got a ton of new vlogs coming your way. And that's it for this video. Don't stress, finesse, peace y'all.